Hi guys, this is Simeon here. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different in the midst of all this craziness that is going on in our world right now. I wanted to speak some hope and comfort into your lives, and not any words from me, but I wanted to take those words from the Bible. Some of you guys might not care about faith, religion, Bible at all. Some of us find a lot of comfort and a lot of meaning in that. Me personally, I work as a pastor. I'm a Christian. I've been committed to that for a long time in my life, and that is a very important part of my life, and that is where I find my meaning and comfort is with God and in God. And I wanted to share some of this. There's a lot of information out there right now that gives a lot of people a lot of fear. And there's also a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of people, even, a lot of Christians use a lot of verses, and I feel like they are probably taking them out of context. And I also think that there's a lot of fear and also condemnation among Christians, people that feel fear or anxiety and feel judged by others and think, oh, I shouldn't have this, I shouldn't be fearful. And, the matter of the fact is that both Christians and non-Christians, every kind of person gets sick sometimes or can be hit by something. We're not immune towards that as believers. And I think it's sad when people act like that. And also, I just want to encourage you. I don't think it's so much whether or not you sometimes have fear or anxiety, but I think it's what you do with it and where you take it. And I just wanted to share some encouraging thoughts from Isaiah chapter 40. It's one of my favorite chapters in the entire Bible. And God has many times spoken to me very powerful things from that chapter. You see, this was at a time of Israel's history where the first 39 chapters of this book of Isaiah, they spoke a lot about judgment, and specifically chapter 39 talked a lot about a very difficult, scary time that will come over Israel. So the people reading this, the reader of this book up to this point, had a lot to be fearful about, a lot to be worried about, and probably some kind of anxiety. But then in chapter 40, the tone shifts a lot. And I think that's very appropriate for our time right now, where a lot of people are worried, whether or not, or whatever has caused this crisis. There's so many conspiracy theories out there and everything. That the fact is, the crisis is here. People are scared. Lives are being changed. A lot of fruit coming from this that's not good. Economy going down, people's lives being destroyed, economies crashing, and there are a lot of tragedies, and we don't want to downplay them. There are a lot of fears. We don't want to downplay them. People are dealing with real issues here and real things. But one thing that has been very important in my life is that these are seasons in our life. And the tone here in the Bible shifts at Isaiah chapter 40, where all of a sudden in chapter 40 verse 1, God says, "Comfort, comfort my people." And the tone really shifts there to this comforting and loving tone. And it says in verse 2, "Speak tenderly to Jerusalem." And I really love that. Often we have this really wrong understanding of God, that he's this harsh God, and it's more like, hey, get your act together, you shouldn't be feeling this way right now. But I believe that is really not who the Bible portrays as God. Sometimes we even have this great misconception of some bad theology and some really misguided people that say that Jesus and the God of the Old Testament are two different characters, and Jesus is loving and the God of the Old Testament is this angry and horrible God, the Father, and Jesus said the opposite. Jesus said that he represented him, and And the truth is that he's a very patient, very loving, very kind God. And we see this here in chapter 40 especially. And these words, to comfort and to speak tenderly, it's just more than just a theoretical love. That's really what God's heart is. And when Jesus came and hugged people, ate with people, spent time with people, that's really God's heart. That's really what he showed and communicated. And so when you then read on in the chapter, all of a sudden the reader here who just read a horrible thing that would happen in chapter 39, all of a sudden reads comfort, and that God will come through, and that God will help, and that this time won't always be like this. Typically when things like that happen in our life, I don't know if you've ever been in a really, really hard time for a very, very long time in your life. We have certainly gone through times like that, and in a sense I would say that we all probably are in something right now that we have been struggling with for a very long time. And sometimes we can really lose hope. We can really lose hope that will ever change. And so when then hope comes or good news comes, we doubt them. And this was exactly what God knew the reader would feel like. So when you then look at verses 9 and onward, God really wants to make sure that, hey, don't hold back. This will really happen. This is really going to happen. You don't need to be worried that I will not be there, that I will not help you in this. And in verse 9, it says, Zion, messenger of good news, shout from the mountaintops. Shout it louder. Shout and do not be afraid. Well, I'd be scared of shouting something like that, claiming something like that for me in such a strong way that I'm willing to shout it out. What if it doesn't happen? I'm going to make a fool of myself. I got my hope up without it actually ending up happening. But that is a fear that is not from God, according to this passage. And look how the Lord confirms this is, yes, the sovereign Lord is coming in power. He will rule with a powerful arm. See, he brings his reward with him as he comes. And then this is just really, it's a reality. God is talking this out as a reality. And then I love this verse 11. And by the way, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. It's usually not the translation I use to preach. It's the translation though that I like to use for my devotional time, and I really like this text and this translation. And it says, he will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. And these verses have really comforted me a lot of times because it really just shows the character of God. And I can really relate to that as a farmer and as a homesteader. I have seen God speak to me so many times through the animals and the garden and the forest. Whenever I'm out there, I just see his character represented in that. And where he says he will feed his flock like a shepherd, it shows his heart. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. And especially I want to speak right now to those of you guys who are parents with children, with family, struggling in the situation. Maybe you've lost your job, maybe really hard things are happening. And those things are real. Those are real. And God is not condemning you for having worries, but he wants you to take them to him. That's the difference. That's where the difference lies. And this verse shows that God will gently lead mother sheep with their young. Another translation renders it that he leads them with understanding. God knows what it is like for a mother sheep to have a lamb and have a way more concern for the young ones. You can't be pushing your cattle or your sheep when you move them to a new paddock. You need to give them the time so that the calves can come with them. Give them the time. It just shows this understanding, this care for them. And that is how the writer of this book, of this chapter, describes God's heart towards his people. And I just want to encourage you, if you have these worries, if you have these fears, don't feel condemnation, don't feel judgment for that. We're all in this together. But the difference lies in that as a believer, you actually have somewhere to go to. You have someone to go to. And that is real. That is something we can go to the bank on. That is something that we can really, really trust. And what's fascinating, if you go on in this chapter, and I'm almost done here, then it says here in verse 15 and verse 16, 17, it says, "For all the nations of the world are but a drop in the bucket. They are nothing more than dust on the scales. He picks up the whole earth as though it were a grain of sand. All the woods in Lebanon's forests and all the Lebanon's animals would not be enough to make a burnt offering worthy of our God. The nations of the world are worth nothing to him. In his eyes they count for less than nothing, mere emptiness and froth." And this talks about just a comparison of the world and what we have built up and our God, and this is what just blows your mind, is that kind of God is the one who looks at us gently with understanding. And so I want to finish with the last verses of this chapter, who are very dear to my heart, because those are my wife's and my wedding verses that really speak a lot of comfort into our lives right now. It says from verse 27, "O Jacob, how can you say the Lord does not see your troubles? O Israel, how can you say God ignores your rights? Have you never heard? Have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure the depth of his understanding. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." Now, you might sit there and be like, "Simeon, why do you share this now? Are you just trying to take advantage of the situation, of the fear that people have?" And I'm not trying to take advantage of everything, but it is often first when times like that strike us that we are forced to think about things in a different ways. When comfort zones are being taken away from us, when things happen that are not normal, we don't like that. We don't like change. We wish everything would go on as normal. And that's often first when we take the time and even consider thinking about something like this. And I don't want to speak condemnation and judgment to you guys right now. I want to speak these encouraging words. But, I also want to end on the note that this is a promise that God gives his children. And the reason for that is simply that God doesn't force himself on anyone. And if people don't want to have to do with him, well, then God will not force himself on them, but he welcomes anyone. I just want to encourage you to trust God's promises. And in these times where money fails, where a lot of things fail, security and health, there's more. And there's more than just this life. There's more than just homesteading. There's more than just gardening. There's more than permaculture. And I think that in these times, it's a great time to think about this. And I hope you found encouragement through this, and I hope to see you soon. And stay tuned as we're going to share more. God bless you. Bye-bye.